It's November 1983. Across Europe, military radios crackle with coded messages. Columns of armored vehicles rumble down foggy German roads. In dimly lit bunkers, NATO officers are running a drill for the most dangerous scenario imaginable, a nuclear release. The exercise is called Able Archer 83. It was supposed to be a routine simulation, just a test of communications and procedures. But to the Soviet Union, watching every move through satellites and spies, it looked nothing like a drill. It looked like the end of the world. The early 1980s were some of the most dangerous years of the Cold War. Ronald Reagan had brought back a hardline anti-Soviet stance, famously calling the USSR an evil empire. The United States was deploying new Pershing II nuclear missiles across Western Europe, missiles that could hit Moscow in less than 10 minutes. For the aging Soviet leadership, this felt like a pistol pressed against their temple. They were terrified that if the West ever launched a surprise attack, they wouldn't even have time to retaliate. Every speech, every missile test, every blip on a radar screen fed a growing paranoia that was about to bring the world to the brink. To counter what they saw as an imminent threat, the KGB launched a massive intelligence program called Operation RYAN, acronym for Nuclear Missile Attack. They ordered agents worldwide to hunt for any sign, no matter how small, that the West was preparing to strike. They were looking for unusual activity at airfields, extra lights on in government buildings at night, even sudden spikes in blood donations. Every trivial detail was wired back to Moscow, painting a picture of escalating Western aggression. For the men in the Kremlin, that picture was terrifying. By 1983, the Soviet Union was on a knife's edge. Its economy was crumbling, its military was aging, and its leader, Yuri Andropov, former KGB chief, was deeply suspicious of Washington. He genuinely believed the Americans might try a decapitation strike, a sudden, overwhelming attack designed to wipe out Soviet command before they could even react. So when NATO announced a massive military exercise called Able Archer 83, Andropov's worst fears seemed to be coming true. That year had already been a disaster for U.S.-Soviet relations. In March, Reagan announced his Strategic Defense Initiative, nicknamed Star Wars, a plan for space-based missile defense. To Moscow, this didn't look like defense at all. It looked like a shield that would let America strike first, without any fear of retaliation. Then, on September 1st, a Korean Airlines passenger jet, Flight 007, strayed into Soviet airspace. Confused radar operators mistook it for a U.S. spy plane and shot it down, killing all 269 people on board, including a U.S. congressman. The world erupted in outrage. Reagan called it an act of barbarism, and the humiliated Kremlin retreated even further into its paranoid shell, convinced America would seek revenge. Just weeks later, disaster was averted by a single man. A Soviet early warning satellite sent a false alarm, indicating that several American missiles were heading toward Moscow. In a secret command bunker, alarms blared and red lights flashed. The officer on duty, Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov, was supposed to immediately report the attack, which would have triggered a full-scale Soviet retaliation. But something felt wrong. The system showed only a few missiles, and ground radar wasn't picking up anything. Trusting his gut instinct over the machine, Petrov declared it a false alarm. He was right. The satellites had mistaken sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds for missile launches. His single moment of doubt saved the world. And this happened just weeks before Able Archer 83. In early November, NATO began what was intended to be a high-level communications exercise. On paper, it was just a computer simulation of coordinating a nuclear release. But this time, NATO made the drill terrifyingly realistic. They used new encrypted radio formats, moved aircraft into simulated alert status, and even had political leaders like Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan participating. For an already paranoid Soviet Union, this didn't look like a game. It looked like the prelude to an actual first strike. Soviet analysts began reporting a flood of unusual NATO activity. Airfields in Western Europe went radio silent. Communications patterns changed. Bases ramped up security. Every one of these actions was part of the simulation, but to Moscow, they were undeniable proof of war preparations. Intelligence from KGB stations described unprecedented NATO alertness. The fact that Western leaders were out of the public eye during the exercise was interpreted as them heading to their doomsday bunkers. In East Germany, Poland, and the Western USSR, the response was swift and silent. Bomber crews were ordered to their planes, nuclear warheads were loaded onto missiles, air defenses went to full alert, and submarines were ready to sail. Some Soviet strategic forces were moved to the highest state of readiness since the Cuban Missile Crisis. The world was seconds away from catastrophe, and almost no one in the West had any idea. Inside NATO bunkers, officers were joking about paperwork, completely unaware that on the other side of the Iron Curtain, real missiles were being armed in response to their simulated war. Only one American officer, Lieutenant General Leonard Perutz, an intelligence chief in West Germany, noticed something was very wrong. He saw unusual Soviet air activity at night, their radar systems powering up and flight patterns crowding the borders. He had a choice. He could raise NATO's alert level to match, which would have instantly confirmed the Soviets' worst fears and likely triggered a preemptive strike. Or he could do nothing. He decided to wait. That quiet, counterintuitive decision may have saved humanity. For 2 long days, the planet held its breath without knowing it. Soviet radar operators watched every NATO movement like hawks. They saw American bombers taxi to the runway and then return to their hangars, part of the drill, and misinterpreted it as final preparations for an attack. One wrong signal, one misunderstood radio message, and thousands of nuclear warheads could have been in the air. Then, on November 11, 1983, the exercise ended. The final coded message was sent. The simulated war was over, and NATO officers went home for the weekend. The Soviets, seeing no launch, slowly and quietly stood their forces down. The crisis was over. It ended in complete silence, unnoticed by the billions of people whose lives had hung in the balance. It wasn't until years later that declassified files revealed just how close we came. A top-secret American review, titled The War Scare of 1983, concluded that Soviet leaders had genuinely believed a nuclear strike from the West was imminent and had prepared to act. Nuclear war almost began over a training exercise, and Washington had never even realized the danger. When Ronald Reagan read these reports, he was stunned. He wrote in his diary that he couldn't believe the Soviets were so paranoid that they might attack preemptively. That realization changed everything for him. He softened his rhetoric, opened back-channel communications, and within a few years, he was signing a landmark arms control treaty with Mikhail Gorbachev, eliminating an entire class of nuclear missiles. For many historians, Able Archer 83 was the turning point, the terrifying moment when both sides stared into the abyss and realized how easily a misunderstanding could destroy them all. The incident revealed a deeper, more chilling truth. In the nuclear age, fear is far more dangerous than aggression. The Soviets didn't almost launch a war because they were eager for one. They almost launched because they were terrified of being the victims of one. That fear had led them to create automated retaliation systems like the Dead Hand, designed to guarantee vengeance even if all their leaders were gone. A machine born from terror that only increased the risk of an accidental apocalypse. For decades, this story remained hidden. The Soviets never admitted their panic, and the exercise details were classified. The world moved on, completely oblivious. It was only after the collapse of the USSR that former Soviet officers began to speak out describing the genuine terror they felt. They truly believed NATO was using a drill to disguise a real attack, and they waited, fingers on the trigger, until the silence on the other side finally convinced them otherwise. The lesson from this is haunting. Nuclear war doesn't have to start with an order from a president. It can start with confusion or radar glitch, a mistranslated message, or a routine training exercise that looks a little too real. That's what Able Archer 83 was, a rehearsal that nearly became the final act. It's easy to think these dangers are a thing of the past, but they're not. Nuclear powers still run drills. They still move bombers and submarines. They still monitor each other with satellites and spies. The technology is smarter, but the human psychology of fear and suspicion remains the same. One false signal, one miscalculation, could bring us right back to 1983. What prevented catastrophe then wasn't brilliant strategy or flawless technology. It was people. It was Stanislav Petrov trusting his gut. It was Leonard Perutz refusing to escalate. It was anonymous Soviet officers who chose to wait just a little bit longer. Human hesitation saved the world. But hesitation isn't the plan. It's luck, and luck eventually runs out. History remembers the Cuban Missile Crisis, with its dramatic speeches and public standoffs. But the 1983 war scare was quieter, and in some ways, even more dangerous. There were no hotlines, no negotiations, just two silent giants, unknowingly preparing for Armageddon. For 48 hours, the fate of our world depended on a misunderstanding, and then, nothing happened. A gray November sky over a world that had almost ended, without ever knowing it. That is the story of Able Archer 83, the mistake that almost erased us from history. If you're fascinated by these hidden stories and moments that shaped our world, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. There are always more secrets to uncover. Thanks for watching.